celebrating, but should Americans be worrying? In the chaos leading up to this week, our own CIA director saying our massive debt is creating a national security risk. Is he right? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Here today with us is Mr. Steve Forbes himself, Lizzie McDonald, Rich Karlgaard, Mike Ozanian, Quentin Hardy, and Mark Tatge. So, Steve, is our national debt causing us to lose all influence?
Hey, David, John Kennedy was right that great power does not have a weak money. Debt is symbolic of our weak money. Yes, America is the most powerful nation in the world still, but the fact of the matter is the world sees us as a declining power because of the weak dollar and our inability to get our finances in control. That's why the Chinese have contempt for us, and that's why countries like Iran and others don't fear us. So the trend line is down for us, up for countries like China. That's the perception.
Well, Mark Tatge, would we have had more influence with events in Egypt if people respected us as an economic superpower and not a debtor nation?
No, I don't think so, David. I think that it's time that we basically take a look right now at our foreign policy, which has largely been geared around going into countries, putting in strongman dictators and supporting them so we can get their oil. So we're about 60 years behind the curve here, and we need to reevaluate our foreign policy here.
But,
this is the perfect
Rich,
opportunity to do
doesn't the fact that we can't get our own books balanced make us less credible internationally?
Yes, I think it does, and Steve is exactly right, particularly with China and Russia also, that this is a grave weakness, and we hope it can be corrected with a growing economy. I think Egypt, Mark might be a little more right. It's a different situation. There, I think, President Obama's passivity has contributed to this, although we will see with President Mubarak stepping down, President Obama has a real chance to convert his presidency from a Jimmy Carter presidency to a JFK Cuban Missile Crisis presidency if he brings this off.
Well, he does, but Mike Ozanian, on the other hand, we've seen about 3 weeks of the Egyptian leadership essentially thumbing their nose at us. Is that tied in any way to the fact that we can't get our own books in order?
Yeah, one of the things that's happened, David, is to support the $14 trillion of debt that we've piled on, we've printed a lot of money, and as Steve pointed out, that's caused the value of the dollar to fall. And as far as poorer countries are concerned, the impact is much higher food prices. Commodity prices have soared. They have trouble feeding themselves in places like Egypt and some other countries where the cost of food is a large portion of their total spending. That causes anti-Americanism to spread.
All right, and Quentin, while we can't help but to be focused on what's happening in Egypt this week, we haven't mentioned the Chinese. I mean, we have very little leverage with them, and that seems to be almost directly economic, no?
Well, they're just an enormous power. They have dominant position politically. They have dominant position with population. And now, yes, they're recycling their money to buy our debt. It's pretty ironic, isn't it, David? 30 years now we've spent this fortune building up this huge military that we thought would make us influential. And in fact, it's helped put us into enormous debt. But wait a minute, maybe there's another side to this. It looks like Mubarak might have moved out without an enormous amount of turmoil in the country, protests, but not murders. It's better than, Clinton did with Milosevic. It's better than Bush 1 did with Noriega. It's better than Bush 2 did. It's probably even better than Reagan did with Marcos. We have to live with dictators. They're a fact of life in the world. I think President Obama played a pretty weak hand pretty well here.
But EMAC, on the other hand, we're hearkening back to the days when we used to be lectured by third world countries, and in fact now the Saudi Arabians are wagging their fingers at us. It doesn't seem like America's on a pinnacle right now.
Yeah, and also China has been finger wagging at us, saying the world doesn't have so much money to keep buying our debt. That was a real eye-opener when they made those statements. And it's not just spending on the military. By the way, interest costs on the U.S. debt is going to equate the spending on the military by next year. We've added more debt under this administration than the 43 prior. We're on track to do that than the 43 prior presidents combined. So, David, it is a national security issue. Even the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman has already said that.
And, Steve, the best that the president could come up with after raising our spending about 25% is to freeze it at that 25%, not to cut anything.
Yeah, if you're on a bender, you don't just say, well, I'm only going to drink a case a day and calling that going on the wagon. It does not work in the real world. And so it starts, David, by stabilizing the dollar. The Fed shouldn't print so many dollars. Start by making real spending cuts, get a real pro-growth tax code instead of talking about it. And how about repealing Obamacare and get some real free markets in the health care with sensible safety nets?
Well, Rich, if we do this, if we do get our house in order a little better than it is right now, will our influence abroad be any stronger?
Steve is absolutely right on this point that has been missed so far until Steve brought it up, and that is growth. Now, I take you back to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan added $1.7 trillion to the American deficit, as Quentin would be happy to point out, during Reagan's 8 years, but he increased the net asset value of the United States by $17 trillion during that same time, 10x leverage, simply because we had pro-growth policies. And that's also what gets respect in the world. So if we could get back to 4 or 5% growth, wow, you know, the Chinese and everyone else would take us seriously, not just economically, but in foreign policy as well.
Rich is absolutely right.
But Rich,
it's sort of like this administration is invalidating all the lessons we learned during the Great Depression. At that time, spending, taxes, regulations, and a tax on businesses went up. FDR called businessmen economic royalists, and in fact, unemployment was coming down towards 6% by 1931 from 1929. And after that, unemployment soared when the government intervened like that, and we had a mini depression within that Great Depression.
Mark Tatge, go ahead.
Well, I'm just glad that Liz is bringing up the Great Depression, because during that time the government did something to put people back to work and to actually create jobs. We had programs for jobs where the government helped stimulate the economy, and that's what the government needs to be doing here.
But the kind of jobs they're talking about here, infrastructure jobs,
let me finish.
they don't need a lot of people on them, Mark. They need a lot of tractors and technology-driven equipment. That's why they won't
finish up,
jobs.
Mark. Go ahead.
What I was going to say is the government is I think moving in the right direction rather than the wrong direction, because the private sector is not creating jobs. It is not hiring people. It is holding all the cash on its balance sheets.
Yeah, when the private sector is not creating jobs, it's because of obstacles put in by the government. A weak dollar, tax uncertainty, massive new regulations. That's not an environment for risk-taking.
They have
profits. FDR didn't do anything to create jobs. It took World War II to get our economy going again. And these people in these poor countries like Egypt, they may be poor, Mark, but they're not stupid.
By the way,
they know our huge debt.
By the way, unemployment...
Hold on. Let Ozanian finish. Ozanian, finish your point.
Worldwide, food prices rose 3.2% in January, the 7th consecutive month they've gone up, and it's at a record high.
Unemployment has gone up in 47 of the 50 states since stimulus was passed.
That is the last word. Well, cash for plug-ins.
exports.
It is the president's new plan to go green. But the Cash It In gang says it is nothing but a new clunker for taxpayers. That's coming up, but first, right here, fired? Well, forget about getting hired.